decline, decay, mutation, calamity, despair, and sorrow. This is known as the Soul Reaver era. These really characterize exactly what it is. Every single being that you encounter in Nosgoth during this time period is a mere shadow of the once noble form that it used to contain. This is true of the vampires, this is true of the humans. The humans have pretty much fallen on their knees from either grief or fallen on their knees in just utter loss of hope. There is no way for them to ever recover the world that was once Nosgoth. In their desperate attempts to achieve freedom from the vampires, they've really just achieved survival. And that survival was only to survive to see the world end. Some survival that was, right? Some freedom they've earned, huh? Can you imagine that? Spending centuries as nothing more than cattle, and finally when you break free of the farms that were holding you down, all you've done is break free just to live out the last few years that the world has left to offer. This is indeed a very sad thing. This is a very sad scenario. This is why I'm approaching this topic very, very seriously, to illustrate to you guys how terrible it is to be a human during the Soul Reaver era. It is, in fact, probably the worst thing that you could possibly be, is a human during this time period. So, with that being said, I actually found a PDF of the game manual, and sure enough, the game manual holds true to my memory. There is literally just one city left in the entire world. Just one desolate city. Far up north in the icy tundras. A different type of wasteland, if you would. And this is the city that the humans now cling to. But really, life there is not any better. Life there is pretty much the same as it is in the rest of the world. It's crap. It's lonely. It's isolated. Now, interestingly enough, inside the game manual, they do show that there are different humans out there. There's 3, predominantly. There's your innocent, day-to-day average Joe, who is just simply alone and unsure of themselves, unsure what the role is of their self. Why exactly do they exist? This world is dead by every means. There's no hope of ever claiming a life or creating a new kingdom. There's no people left to really enjoy the space that they now have. So they just wander. They wander aimlessly, and some of them are always wandering, looking over their shoulders, scared shitless with every step that they take, because they know the horrors that await them in this world. There's deformed monsters at every turn, and at any point in time, your life could be snuffed out. Now, there are also a few vampire hunters who are still around. Vampire hunters who have fought hard against the vampire menace and are still living in their glory time, per se. But really, they're fighting no longer to protect, because there's no one left to protect. So they just wander the old glorious halls that their fellow vampire hunters used to be in. They wander with their ancient weapons that they've had for the past 100 years that were used to secure their freedom from Kain's empire when it fell. Really, they are just lone warriors seeking out to more or less preserve what was left of humanity, to preserve the temples, to preserve their history. But even then, they have failed their duty. This is another sad story. To be a warrior, to be almost like a samurai, if you would, with no leader, a warrior with no army, a warrior who's defending a temple, guarding its history, but ultimately you know the temple's going to crumble because the world is crumbling. So their own existence is nihilistic. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. You can kind of see a theme here with all of humanity. They are doomed. They're pretty much given into despair, and you see it in their society. It is nothing but just darkness, decay, and forever thoughtful as to why it is that they even exist right now. It's pretty interesting nonetheless that they still try to survive. Now, there are some, and this is the third group, that are a little crazy. They've more or less looked at the mutations that have racked their world. Look at the desolation amongst it. And they think that the vampires are the salvation. They're the key. So they just worship these deformities, these nasty beings. And they will actually go around and spend their whole time trying to find humans and then subdue them and drag them to a vampire. Doesn't matter who. It could be any vampire. And then they will worship that vampire, praising it, hoping that the vampire can give them crops, give them some sort of boon, possibly even turn them into vampires. But little do they realize that it's a moot point. The vampires they are worshipping are nothing more than feral beasts who've pretty much lost all sentience. The vampires that they worship do not care for godhood. They believe that, just as they do, that the world is pretty much over. That really all that's left is to fight over the scraps and bones that are left and remaining amongst the countless of ruins that lay beyond them. It is a very pathetic existence, but it's very interesting nonetheless to see what happens when such dissolution and such despair sinks into a species. Some just worship the decay and rot and think that there's a way on top of it all. Some just decide to spend the rest of their days forever alone, wandering, investigating for themselves. Could this really be the end of the world? And some, they try to find some structure, some order in their life, like the warriors. They try to find some sort of way to organize and put the world into a box that they can live in. In this case, it would be like guarding a temple. In this case, it's upholding duty, upholding honor. But all of this is truly meaningless. So you wondered what humanity is like in the Soul Reaver era? This is what it's like. It is sadness. It is depression. It is decline. Now you may wonder, what about the fortified city? Well, the issue is that people keep leaving the city. Now, why those people are leaving the city, it could be a few reasons. It could be just simply there's no hope anymore. There may be too few people left to actually create a sustainable population, which is probably the case. There's too few people now for there to ever be hopes of renovation and technology. They live so far up north that they are probably having difficulties creating crops. The sun is blotted out of the sky because of the damage that the vampire empire has caused to the world to protect themselves. By blocking out the sun, there's basically no crops. The only things that grow are just barely surviving grass and just dust and sand everywhere. There's truly no hope. So to wander outside the city is more or less them either deciding, if I'm going to spend the last of my days, I'd rather spend it out alone outside of this cramped city, or I'm going to just wander outside and hope that I can find some salvation, some bastion, some great city that we just never heard of. But ultimately, they give in to despair. They realize that this is a fool's errand. They realize that the rumors are true. Monsters lurk every corner. That the rumors were true. Humanity is truly doomed. And that all the truth-sayers were correct. The world is on its final years. The world is racked with earthquakes every second. And every second, the world gets a fraction smaller and smaller and smaller until it eventually caves in on itself. Canyons are created by the day. The world is ultimately doomed, and with that, humanity is doomed with it. This is why I view humanity as the ultimate victims of the Legacy of Kain series, because they were neither vampire nor Hilden, and yet they got screwed the most out of this whole altercation. There was a time period, though, known as the pre-Blood Omen era, and during the Blood Omen era, that it kind of was the time of humanity to rise and take control of the world. But unfortunately, the damage done by the vampires of ancient times had pretty much sealed their fate before they could even grow, before they could even leave the caves that they once inhabited. The world was already doomed. There was no way for humanity to ever become the species that was on the top. Nope. Their world was doomed from the get-go. And now in the Soul Reaver era, we see the consequence. Gray cities, abandoned fortresses, one last desperate battle where 20-odd humans can get together and that was considered an army. Yeah, long lost are the days of the Legion. Long lost are the days of grand crusades. Now it was only a battle of survival. Now it was only a battle of, can we make it another more few days? Can we make it just another month? Most likely the answers were always no, you could not. This is a world of predators. And the biggest predator right now is the world. Because the world is about to consume everybody's life when it finally dies. Besides that, this has been Fruit 700. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know it's a very depressing topic. And I know I didn't really have much pictures to show. But hey, I decided that it really doesn't need any pictures. Such a depressing topic. You can't illustrate depression, really. There's some ways to convey it, but really there's not. Such depression, I would expect a lot of suicide amongst the human population. Such despair, such horror, such fear in such a society that's uncertain about what their position is in the world. I would expect that. So besides that, this has been Free 700. I am out. Besides that, don't forget to subscribe down below. I know it's so hard to, remember that, but please do.